There's a woman in the Appalachian Mountains whose life doesn't make sense at first glance. She lost every one of her children in infancy, all 24 of them, and yet later became one of the most trusted midwives in her region, helping bring hundreds of babies into the world. This is the story of Orlean Hawks Puckett. Orlean Hawks Puckett lived in the Appalachian Mountains during the mid-1800s, in a place where isolation wasn't romantic and help didn't arrive quickly, if it arrived at all. And at the centre of her life is a fact that never really settles, no matter how many times you hear it. She experienced 24 pregnancies, and none of her children survived infancy. Orlean was born around 1844 in North Carolina. Precise records are thin, which isn't unusual for the area and time. Formal education wasn't part of her life, and survival mattered far more than documentation. She married John Puckett at a young age, around 1860, and not long after, her adult life became bound to repeated pregnancy. In 1862, she gave birth to her first child, a daughter named Julia Ann. The baby died in infancy. At the time, this kind of loss, while devastating, wasn't rare. Infant mortality was high, and families often lived with the expectation that not every child would survive. But it didn't stop there. It kept happening. Over the years that followed, Orlean went through pregnancy after pregnancy. Some babies were stillborn, others lived briefly, hours, days, sometimes weeks. None lived long enough to grow. Each birth ended in the same outcome. Amongst the grief and pain, work still needed doing, food still needed growing, seasons didn't wait, and the next pregnancy came regardless of what had happened before. Her babies were buried locally, as was common at the time. Accounts describe small graves marked simply, without formal headstones or inscriptions. These burials were close to where she lived, not separated from daily life, but part of the land around their home. By the 1870s, Orlean and her husband had moved to a farm in what is now Carroll County, Virginia. Some of her early children were buried near their first home in North Carolina. Later losses occurred after the move, with burials taking place in local family graveyards in the area. Modern historians have suggested possible medical explanations for the repeated losses, most commonly Rh incompatibility, a condition that wasn't understood or treatable at the time. It's a plausible theory, but it remains exactly that, a later interpretation, not something Orlean would have known or had any way to address. What matters is that the losses continued, and there was no intervention available to change the outcome. There's a phrase attributed to Orlean later in life, where she described those years of childbirth as being alike as burrs on a mule's tail. It's a plain way of putting it. No reflection, no explanation, just repetition one after another. Eventually, the pregnancies stopped, not because anything improved, but because time moved on, and she carried on living in the same region, with the same land and the same memories attached to it. Then, in 1889, a neighbour named Byron Bowman came to her door. His wife was in labour, and there was no doctor available. Distance and terrain made outside help unrealistic. He asked Orlean for assistance. From her point of view, this was huge. This was a woman whose personal experience of childbirth had ended in loss every single time. And yet, when someone needed help, she didn't refuse. She went. That night, Orlean Hawks Puckett helped deliver her first baby that survived. That moment didn't erase what came before, but it did change what came next. That first birth in 1889 didn't suddenly turn Orlean Hawks Puckett into a recognised midwife. There was no announcement, no title, no moment where she could decide this was her new role. Someone needed help, she helped. Then another neighbour asked, then another. In places like the Appalachian Mountains, reputation wasn't built on certificates. It was built on outcomes. If a baby lived, people remembered who was there. If a mother came through labour safely, they remembered who stayed calm and didn't leave when things became difficult. And Orlean, she kept being called for. She had no formal medical training. What she had was experience, more than anyone around her, and a deep understanding of how childbirth could go wrong. She learned by doing, by watching, and by remembering. Not from books, but from years of lived reality inside mountain homes where there was no second chances. She travelled long distances to help reach labouring women, often on foot, sometimes with the help of a mule. Across steep terrain and in all weather, when word reached out that someone needed help, she went. Distance wasn't a reason to refuse, it was simply part of the work. Over time, Orlean assisted in the births of hundreds of babies, and later accounts credit her with helping deliver more than 1,000 children across the region. That number didn't come from a single record book, it came from decades of community memory and local accounts that all point in the same direction. She was there for an extraordinary number of births across many years. Every one of her pregnancies ended in loss. All 24 of her children died in infancy. Yet, she became known as the woman whose presence during labour made survival more likely. According to historical accounts, she never lost a mother or a baby while acting as a midwife. That doesn't mean every birth was easy. It means she understood risk better than most people ever would. She knew when to act and when not to panic. She knew what complications looked like early, and she knew that staying steady mattered more than anything else. She continued this work well into old age, long past the point where walking miles over mountain paths shouldn't have been expected of anyone. She kept going because people still needed her, and because, in that world, usefulness mattered more than comfort. Orlean Hawks Puckett died in 1939 after being forced to leave her home during the construction of the Blue Ridge Parkway. Not long after relocating, her health declined and she passed away. She was buried in the region she had served for most of her life. Today, her cabin has been preserved and her name is remembered. She lost every one of her own children. She helped bring hundreds, possibly thousands of others into the world. She lived with both truths at the same time. She's a perfect example of what endurance can look like when there's no monetary reward waiting at the end. Just a decision to keep turning up when people need you. If this one stayed with you, let me know your thoughts in the comments. The losses, the sheer scale of what she did afterward. I'll see you in the next one.